It is such an honor and privilege to be with you here for the W. David Baird Distinguished Lecture Series, and I want to thank everyone at Seaver College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences for their gracious hospitality. It's been an extraordinary day. During the past 14 months, my colleagues and I at AAC&U have been engaged in a comprehensive, integrative planning process centered on rebuilding public trust in the promise of liberal education and inclusive excellence. Our aim is to create an ascendant narrative that contests accusations of irrelevancy and illegitimacy leveled against higher education in general and liberal education in particular. Indeed, the plan serves as a collective call to action to make visible the transformative power of institutions like Pepperdine. And for those of us who believe that higher education is inextricably linked to our nation's historic mission of educating for democracy, the work seems more urgent than ever. The public purpose of higher education is something I'm particularly passionate about, not only because of my role as president of an organization whose mission it is to advance the vitality and public standing of liberal education by making quality and equity the foundation for excellence in undergraduate education in service to democracy, but also because I was the direct beneficiary of a program designed to promote civic engagement and leadership through educational opportunity. The summer I graduated from high school, I managed to escape the factory work I had done alongside my mother the previous summer only because I received funding under the Federal Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. At the time, CETA funds were reserved for high school students who were at risk of permanent unemployment due to extreme economic and social disadvantages. That fall, I continued working 35 hours a week under a CETA grant while attending a local community college with the additional help of Pell Grants and Perkins loans. As an only child, I had decided to forego a full scholarship to my state's flagship university in order to serve as a caregiver for my mother, who had become chronically ill. 2 years later, as you heard, I transferred to Mount Holyoke College, and within another 2 years was headed off to Brown University for my PhD. When I graduated, I vowed that I would never forget the lessons that I learned in that transition from community college to the Seven Sisters and the Ivy League. Thus, throughout my career, I've been committed to promoting access to excellence in higher education, regardless of socioeconomic background, to the centrality of liberal learning, and to defending political scientist Benjamin Barber's notion of colleges and universities as civic missions, where we not only educate every person to make her free, but we free every person to make her educable by serving as a visible force in the lives of the most disenfranchised members of society. In these days of widespread skepticism regarding the value added of college education, I'm particularly concerned that we are eroding democratic access to the more substantive avenues by which learning enriches us all. We are impeding access not only to the public purpose of higher education, but access to its personal purpose as well. By the personal purpose of higher education, I mean engendering the capacity to grapple with the most fundamental questions of human existence. My own experience is illustrative. Among the courses I signed up for during my first semester of college was an American literature class. There weren't many students in the class. Most enrolled in courses that more equally translated into better jobs, or any job at all. One evening, my professor arranged for us to see a Hartford performance of All the Way Home, a Pulitzer Prize-winning play by Tad Mosel. I had never attended a professional production before, and Hartford was a world away, known only to me as the place my father traveled nightly on a third-shift bus to work as a welder at Pratt & Whitney. I remember piling into a car with my classmates, dressed in a blue velveteen jumpsuit. It was the 70s, after all. And when the lights dimmed, I was transported. In the dark, perhaps especially in the dark, I felt a part of something important. Surrounded by classmates, I stared ahead at the stage and waited for what I could not yet see. After the play, our class went for Chinese food and talked. The performance had raised so many big questions about faith, grief, and trust. We discussed the last act when a wife mourns her husband's unexpected death. "I hope he loved being," she said, recognizing the possibility that he never realized his own strength and potential. What that evening taught me, and why I remembered after all these years, is that we all have a right to experience being. We are all entitled to live in our strength. We all deserve opportunities to find our best and most authentic selves. A liberal education can be a guide to such personal enrichment, but when we imply that the only outcome disenfranchised students care about is money, we run the risk of circumscribing their futures, both personally and in the public domain. Yet we need to remember that increasing access to educational opportunities alone is not sufficient to destabilize the reproduction of social inequality in the academy. When J.D. Vance's best-selling memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, took the literary world by storm just prior to the 2016 presidential election, it served as a stark reminder to leaders in higher education of the extent to which despair arising from a lack of social and cultural capital has an impact on student success. And I know that Dr. Vance was here last week. He is one who exemplifies Abdul John Muhammad's concept of the specular border intellectual, one who is equally familiar with two groups or cultures and yet is at home in neither. Reminiscent of Chicago school sociologist Robert Ezra Park's concept of the marginal man, who lives and shares intimately in the cultural life and traditions of two distinct peoples, quote, never quite willing to break with his past and his traditions, and not quite accepted because of prejudice in a new society in which he now sought to find a place. The result is a Du Boisian conflict of the divided self. In a world in which the inscription of difference tends to be valorized, and groups organized around race, class, gender, culture, and nation arrive in an identity by means of distinguishing themselves from others through their homogeneity, those caught between various group formations are often forced to internalize dichotomies between aspirations and lived experience. While Vance describes both the social awkwardness of attending lavish parties at, at his Ivy League alma mater, and the discomfort of knowing that he would be viewed by many at home as being too big for his britches, he also reveals the stigma of socioeconomic ascent he felt from the other side. Thus he confesses, quote, "It's not just our own communities that reinforce the outsider attitude. It's the places and people that upward mobility connects us with." There's a psychic toll exacted on the poor, on first-generation college students, and on individuals from underrepresented groups. However, while many programs in higher education have been designed to promote success among these students by addressing the lack of social and cultural capital, along with the absence of social networks and a sense of belonging, what we have paid less attention to in academia are the real costs associated with achieving upward mobility. If we are to make strides toward an equity-minded approach to higher education that spans across the curricular and co-curricular and extends throughout the entire student experience, we need to reject once and for all a deficit perspective that focuses on what students are missing, and instead offer evidence-based interventions and strategies through the targeting of cognitive, non-cognitive, and psychological factors that emphasize an asset perspective. The data confirm what we already know about those like Vance who occupy this interstitial space. Research shows that factors such as poverty, racism, and social marginalization contribute to diminished cognitive resources as well as isolation. Let's take one of these factors, poverty. In the 2017 report of the Wisconsin Hope Lab, Sarah Goldrick-Rab, Jed Richardson, and Anthony Hernandez unveil growing rates of food insecurity among community college students, with 2 out of 3 experiencing this phenomenon. At the same time, half of the students within this population are facing shelter insecurities, with 13 to 14% identifying as homeless. Given the health and safety concerns accompanying these statistics, it should come as no surprise that under such circumstances, many of these students have reduced cognitive bandwidth, diminishing the likelihood of their learning, persisting, and graduating from college. Only by drawing attention to the persistent economic and cultural barriers that continue to thwart the equity imperative upon which the American dream is built, will we be able to fulfill the true promise of American higher education. However, efforts to restore public trust in the promise of liberal education and inclusive excellence are further hampered by a prevailing national rhetoric that reflects deep partisan divides concerning higher education's value. The results of a recent Pew Research poll indicate that a majority of respondents from one of the 2 dominant political parties regards colleges and universities as not only not having a positive impact on American society, but as having a negative impact on the United States. Moreover, at a time when job prospects for U.S. college graduates remain uncertain and student loan burdens are burgeoning, there's been a decoupling of higher education from the American dream. This perception was highlighted in a recent Kaiser Family Foundation and CNN poll conducted of white working class individuals, defined as white Americans without college degrees, in which 51% said that their lives would be no different if they had 4-year college degrees. Standing in stark contrast to working class blacks and working class Hispanics, for whom the perceived correlation was much stronger, with 73% of African Americans and 74% of Hispanics maintaining that a 4-year college degree would indeed make their lives better. Many white working class Americans remain skeptical with respect to whether a college degree will enable them to achieve the hallmark of the American dream, namely having a life better than one's parents. This is the case despite research indicating that Americans with a 4-year college degree out-earn their peers by 98%. Positing employability as the lone metric for determining higher education's value precludes a consideration of the ways in which the illumination of human consciousness through literature, philosophy, music, and the arts allows us to flourish fully as human beings, enriching our experiences as individuals and as members of a community. And yet, white working class voters have come to reject what they regard as leftist intellectual democratic politicians amidst concerns over a liberal bias at colleges and universities, fueled by high-profile controversies related to freedom of expression on college campuses. Critics have attributed a new wave of student activism to faculty brainwashing in service to a progressive ideal that promotes civic engagement and globalization while tearing apart the fabric of American society. In fact, one of the most challenging cultural barriers contributing to the growing economic segregation in higher education today is a prevailing rhetoric in which the art of persuasion has been replaced by incivility and misinformation. Arising from an entire industry designed to sway public opinion, rhetoric for hire has given rise to widespread anti-intellectualism and a rejection of experts in the US and much of Europe, as exemplified during the Brexit campaign. As Tony Gallagher and Jennifer Harrison know in their work on the relationship between the Protestant working class and the community of Queen's University in Ireland, quote, United Kingdom policy on higher education was influenced by a concern that public confidence in science and evidence-based policy has been eroded. A House of Lords report suggested that scandals around BSE, mad cow disease, and genetically modified foods has led to a crisis of confidence in science. And so ameliorating measures were required by the government. Nevertheless, when we characterize working class frustrations over income equality as anti-intellectual without looking at their underlying concerns, we do so at our peril. Only by understanding the ways in which Americans think and feel about their own economic security will we be able to comprehend the attack on colleges and universities. Scholars of the white working class offer compelling insights into the mindset of those who reject higher education at the ostensible expense of their own best interests. Among these is Sherry Lincoln from Georgetown University, who reminds us of the long-term benefits of industrial work, such as allowing workers to buy homes, send their children to college, develop work-based social networks, and enjoy stable family and community lives. Comparing the toxic effects of deindustrialization to those of radioactive waste, she insists, quote, "If we want to understand the half-life of deindustrialization, we should listen to the stories of those who still feel the loss of economic security, but also of social networks and individual possibility." Likewise, Michelle Tokarzek, a professor at Goucher College who studies the white working class, provides a lens for understanding the disillusionment with higher education as an essential component of the American dream. For Tokarzek, the cynicism can be traced back to the white working class's, quote, economic anxieties and political resentments, but also to their cultural fears, including their concerns about the elusive costs of upward mobility, the message that was reaffirmed in Vance's memoir. Rising inequalities of wealth, income, and access to affordable college opportunities accelerated the success of President Trump's campaign built on making America great again. To comprehend why his message resonates so deeply, we need only to look at the fact that nearly half of Americans who once believed in the American dream, defined as the belief that if you work hard you will get ahead, are convinced that it no longer exists. The conviction that a college degree and status as an intellectual are unattainable is accompanied by the contention that admission to college is no longer regarded as a guarantee for upward social mobility. The reduction of the American dream solely to prosperity as disconnected from the values of democracy and freedom has contributed to the abandonment of the notion of higher education as a public good in favor of its being viewed as a private commodity, with colleges and universities now situated as sites of exclusion. Despite his inherited wealth and recent citing of his Ivy League education that he received as a shield against incivility, Donald Trump has remarkably positioned himself as the quintessential self-made man, privileging hard work and common sense above intellectualism. Understanding the psychological factors at play, after winning the Nevada caucus, he exclaimed, quote, "I love the poorly educated. We're the smartest people. We're the most loyal people." To help explain why members of the public buy into the mythology surrounding President Trump, there's been much post-election speculation and a number of fascinating studies examining the reasons individuals act against their own best interests by holding false beliefs in the face of incontrovertible evidence. Former President Obama's political advisor, David Simas, offers one account. Quote, "Until recently, religious institutions, academia, and the media set out the parameters for acceptable discourse, and it ranged from the unthinkable to the radical to the acceptable to policy. The continuum has changed. Had Donald Trump said the things that he said during the campaign 8 years ago about banning Muslims, about Mexicans, about the disabled, about women, his Republican opponents, faith leaders, academia, would have denounced him, and there would be no way around those voices. Now, through Facebook and Twitter, you can get around them. There is a social permission for this kind of discourse. Plus, through the same social media, you can find people who agree with you, who validate your thoughts and opinions. This creates a whole new permission structure, a sense of social affirmation for what was once thought unthinkable. This is a foundational change. In this world without agreed-upon facts, where there is a new permission structure, the art of teaching and learning becomes that much more complicated. So how have we arrived at this point? In The Enigma of Reason, cognitive scientists Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber argue that reason is an evolved trait, often taking a back seat to our ability to cooperate with others, which is seen to be even a bigger advantage to survival as a species. Mercier and Sperber point out that, quote, living in small bands of hunter-gatherers, our ancestors were primarily concerned with their social standing and with making sure that they weren't the ones risking their lives on the hunt while others loafed around in the cave. There was little advantage in reasoning clearly, while there was much to be gained from winning arguments. Similarly, cognitive scientists Stephen Sloman Brown and Philip Fernbeck suggest, quote, as a rule, strong feelings about issues do not emerge from deep understanding. There is instead confirmation bias, which becomes politically dangerous when people rely on the baseless opinion of another and a third person agrees, leading to a greater tendency to ignore contradictory views. Their experiments showed that even when people disagreed vehemently with a variety of policy issues, individuals themselves had little insights into why they held those views. According to Brown and Fernbeck, getting people to, quote, spend less time pontificating and more time trying to work through the implications of policy proposals may help us realize how clueless we are and moderate our views. And this, they argue, may be the only form of thinking that will shatter the illusion of explanatory depth and change people's minds. If people's beliefs are based more on tribalism than reason, in addressing the misinformation and incivility resulting from the debilitating impact of a rhetoric for hire, we need to redouble our focus on world citizenship and the interdependence of all human beings and communities as the foundation for education. Understanding that anger, hostility, and pity each carry the risk of creating barriers to humanistic identification, facilitating a humanizing identification, finding commonality among individuals with radically different perspectives, and offering a starting point for collective social transformation carries new import. A commitment to global learning grounded in rigorously analyzing and openly questioning the sources of narratives, including history, evidence, and facts, is based on a principle that the world is a collection of interdependent yet inequitable systems, and that higher education has a vital role in expanding knowledge of human and natural systems, privilege and stratification, and sustainability and development to foster individuals' abilities to advance equity and justice at home and abroad. Philosopher Martha Nussbaum offers a compelling defense for this type of cosmopolitan education in the future. Nussbaum observes, quote, one of the greatest barriers to rational deliberation in politics is the unexamined feeling that one's own current preferences and ways are neutral and natural. An education that takes national boundaries as morally salient too often reinforces this kind of irrationality by lending to what is an accident of history a false air of moral weight and glory. Nussbaum argues that placing a community of human beings above national boundaries will bring us closer to solving global problems that require international cooperation. But it will necessitate a revision of curricula in support of the recognition of a shared future and the fostering of global dialogue grounded in geography, ecology, traditions, and the values of others. It is a future in which our deliberations are first and foremost deliberations about human problems of people in particular concrete situations, not problems that are growing out of a national identity that is altogether unlike that of others, and in which students recognize not only humanity wherever it is encountered, but also understand humanity in all of its strange guises. When every human being becomes a part of our community of dialogue and concern, and our political deliberations are grounded in that common human bond, it becomes more difficult to be dismissive of the well-being of others, and much easier to denounce ignorance and bigotry. Beyond the classroom, members of the academic community must ensure that we are effective participants in and communicators of the events of our time. The humanistic practice of teaching and Cosmopolitan's underlying message should extend beyond the gates of the academy. So how can those of us in higher education facilitate conversations around the important matters of the day and spark interest in mediating pluralism through dialogue and civic understanding? This is not just a matter of making our research on critical social issues understandable and available to the broader public, or practicing the scholarship of engagement, though these in and of themselves could help address some of the public skepticism and negative perceptions of higher education as elitist and separated from the practical matters of everyday life. Instead, institutions of higher education must transition away from the expert model of knowledge generation to publicly active scholarship, which enacts democratic engagement designed to promote a more equitable society by partnering with K-12, business, industry, and citizens themselves to take up some of the most pressing ethical, legal, and social issues of the day. This model of publicly active scholarship breaks down barriers and establishes a bilateral relationship between research expertise and local epistemologies, public and private, scholar and citizen, that can serve to erode partisanship resulting from competing ideologies. If we hope to bolster the reputation of higher education within democratic society and restore public trust in the promise of liberal education and inclusive excellence, we must have a visible impact on the communities in which we live, grappling with real-world problems alongside our neighbors, locally and around the globe. We must lead the way in working with others to create spaces for debate, and we must prove false humorist Mark Twain's assertion that, quote, all schools, all colleges have two great functions, to confer and to conceal valuable knowledge. Canadian philosopher Mark Kingwell notes that while those of us in the academy may eschew populism and its condemnation of life in the ivory tower, quote, we're losing when it comes to reason and critical intelligence and civility. We are losing when it comes to the basic justification of what we do. We are losing on defending universities as a force for good. Kingwell argues that it is despicable to enjoy the fruits of academic success and not feel a profound sense of obligation to demonstrate why our efforts have a wider value than just our own personal satisfaction. I could not agree more. If academics rely exclusively on the mechanics of arcane study to get out our message, failing to utilize the most vibrant vectors for helping citizens to cope with humanistic questions, scholarly pursuits as anything more than an ossified depository of ancient curiosity will die. Individuals will still thirst for humanistic guidance in seeking answers to their questions and compass points for their endeavors, but the academy as an institution will become nothing more than self-referential as the frames of humanistic practice disappear forever. There are unprecedented opportunities with the emergence of new digital platforms to create what Mark Anthony Neal refers to as fictive kin that connect those in communities to those in the academy. Now more than ever, this is an imperative in catalyzing Kwame Anthony Appiah's idea that, quote, in the human community, as in national communities, we need to develop habits of coexistence, conversation in its older meaning of living together, association, and make this central to the liberal education we deliver in our strivings to educate for democracy within the context of a post-truth era. Thank you. So I am happy to answer any questions you have. I know we talked about a schedule where there would be a break at 6, but I really did want this to be a conversation, so eager to hear your questions and comments.
If you have a question, please raise your hand. We have microphones, and we'll bring a microphone to you.
Amanda.
And I could perhaps begin by saying, expressing my condolences over the Dodgers. I'm a Red Sox fan, and so we have something in common.
I don't think she saw you. She didn't see you, sorry.
All right. To extend the metaphor, I'll bat lead off. What do you want us to do? We're academics. What you said really, I felt convicted when that quote about being despicable, when you enjoy the fruits of what you do. And, there's something to that. But
Yes.
do you want us to write up? Or is the vision that you're outlining one in which we write op-ed articles, we get involved in party politics, try to develop a third party? How do you get involved in local politics? Just maybe some concrete ways in which those of us who are blessed to be academics can change what we see as a rather dire situation.
Yes. All of the things that you mentioned are great suggestions. My concern is that this perception of those of us in higher education as existing within an ivory tower as a willful disconnect from the practical matters of everyday life can be broken down, and we can provide access to excellence in higher education only if we are visible in the lives of those who are the most skeptical. And so one of the most profound acts that we do as academicians is in the classroom as humanities practitioners in using our scholarship to provide access through disseminating knowledge, through knowledge creation. But we need to do more than that. We all know that it doesn't do any good to invite someone into your home if they feel that they're not welcome there. And for so many people, as I mentioned, colleges and university campuses are seen as stigmatizing. Neither of my parents had the opportunity to graduate from high school. My father dropped out of school at the age of 16 to join the war effort right after Pearl Harbor Day. And my mother got married at 16 at a time when you couldn't be married and stay in high school. And yet they were extraordinary citizens. They volunteered, they gave blood, they were in the PTA, they went bowling, so all of the things you could hope for in a community member, and yet they never stepped foot on a college campus. And when I graduated from Brown and invited my father to come see me receive my PhD, he said, first of all, I'm not driving up the hill to Providence and spending 35 cents on a gallon of gas for each. And he said, and don't you think this makes you better than us? Because it doesn't. So he was genuinely concerned about that rift that would be created by my being in the academy. So I guess whatever we can do to help people feel valued, I think the biggest challenge for higher education today is a growing economic and racial segregation. 1 out of every 2 college students drops out of college. We only have 44% of people getting college degrees, and then that goes between 33 and 44%. So we need to do a better job. So the more that we can weigh in as public intellectuals, as commentators on the most significant issues of the day, the easier it will be to create access to liberal education and ensure that everyone has an opportunity to flourish fully.
Dr. Pasquerella, I'm the back row.
Okay.
I go to church here on Sunday morning, so I sit on the back row. It's just how we do. I'm Andy Benton. I'm the president of Pepperdine University, and I haven't had the chance to shake your hand yet, but I look forward to that. What would you say in the face of increasing consumerism, focused by parents and sometimes even students on getting jobs, gainful employment, earning over the course of a lifetime and things like that, when what we do here best is the liberal arts and the breadth of an education, the breadth of a preparation for hopefully a life not only well lived but well loved. But what do you say in response to that in this age of consumerism?
It's a great question. Thank you for it, and thank you so much for having me here. I would probably say what you say, and that is that a liberal education is the best preparation that we can offer students in a world that is globally interdependent, where rapidly changing technology means rapid obsolescence. the best education that we can offer for our students is one in which you learn to write and speak and think with precision, coherence, and clarity, anticipate and respond to objections, propose, construct, evaluate arguments, are adaptable and flexible in the face of change, but most importantly, to engage in that kind of moral imagination necessary to imagine what it's like to be in the shoes of another different from oneself, or what Anna DeVere Smith talks about as putting oneself in the words of another different from oneself, listening between the lines. And without that, it won't matter. The jobs of the future haven't yet been invented. But it is a tough sell, and not only to those who have not had experience with higher education, but even to those who have, the college-educated parents who are saying, I want my children to thrive. And part of education's job is, I think, higher education has a role in creating the workforce. My own son, Pierce, so I have my son Spencer here, he has a twin brother, Pierce. And Pierce was one who railed against the liberal education he received. When I was the president of Mount Holyoke College, he came into the presidential library one day, and my husband John's an entomologist, and Spencer was working on his PhD in African American studies, and Pierce came in, and I was writing a speech, and Spencer's working on his dissertation, and John was reading, and he said, "This is the most dysfunctional family on the planet." And I said, probably not, but he said, look, it's a beautiful day. We should be out there doing things. Pierce studied television and film production, and he never understood why he had to take courses in small group communication, why he had to take courses in cultural competence, why he had to take a philosophy course. And so he was in graduate school, and his first job, as it turns out, was with the Jerry Springer Show. And so he quickly learned we are not, in fact, the most dysfunctional family on the planet. But he called me at the end of one day, and he said, hey, Mom, guess what? I got to book the talent today. And I said, oh, really? Describe that. He said, well, I ran out and I got the talent some ties and some cigarettes. And then he said, I spent 2 hours in the green room with them. And he said, now I understand the value of a liberal education. He said, I didn't understand why I had to take those courses. I just wanted to be behind a camera. And yet, nobody ever explained that to me. And so I think in higher education, we need to do a better job at connecting curriculum to career, explaining why we're asking students to do the things that we ask them to do, so that they can envision and do what Jeff Solingo will talk about, and that is create a narrative that connects the experiences one has in college with what employers are looking for. So at AAC&U, we know we did employer surveys and we did student surveys. 80% of students believe that they are prepared with the skills necessary to thrive in the workforce. Only 20% of the employers who hired those graduates believed that the students had those skills. How can we close the gap? And how can we do that? By implementing high-impact practices that connect curriculum to careers in ways that are visible to both students and their parents.
Hi, Dr. Pasquerella. I'm Isabella. I'm a student here at Pepperdine. I appreciate how you're bringing up the potential benefits in our future as students from graduating from a liberal arts college. But can you speak more to how we can take advantage and find meaning in the process of gaining the liberal arts education in and of itself? Because it's really my peers my peers and I both might find it to be a struggle finding meaning in general education courses that don't really apply to what we're going to be doing in a few years from now. So I think that that's a conversation that we should have more so that we can not find that it's a disadvantage to be a liberal arts college instead of an advantage.
Well, as I mentioned, I think there really are advantages to being at a liberal arts college. And if you take the time to reflect on the experiences that you're having within particular classes and make the link between the curricular and co-curricular experiences you're having, to think about the ways in which the courses you're taking are enhancing your critical thinking skills, are enhancing your capacity to work with others who are different from you, who are causing you to question things that you haven't questioned before. A part of it will come later when you experience different things in life, and you'll say, oh yes, that's why that professor was asking me to do this. I mean, that was the point of the story of my son Pierce, but I think looking at the reasons why your professors are asking you to do things is critically important. Bill Deresowitz's book, Excellent Sheep, he talks about his experience teaching at Yale and what he refers to as this duck syndrome, where students seem to be floating serenely and calmly across the water when they're paddling madly beneath the surface, and the extent to which students today feel anxiety. And he asked his classes, what's the favorite book that you read over the semester? And they said, we didn't do any reading. We were too busy. And what he says is they were too busy jumping through hoops, too busy trying to get the next gold star, to engage in the love of learning, to reflect on the privilege and possibility of the education that they were receiving. So that's what you need to keep in mind, the privilege and possibility that you are creating a narrative in your own life, and that you have the opportunity through everything that you're doing to be an innovator in your own life through the rich resources that are provided. So think of each other as equally important resources in that process.
Hi, my name is Austin Welch, and I'm a student here, and I think I appreciate your talk. Thank you so much. And I have a question for you in the way of, in the posing to faculty and inside the classroom, of extending that conversation and making sure that that's more improved in that way. I think also looking at maybe from the student perspective, for some, those general education courses could be getting the project done and getting the grade for it, and that's just the end result. But have you ever seen should student organizations have kind of continue that conversation and lead that charge as well, in your opinion, in continuing those conversations co-curricular outside of that classroom and that environment, where it's truly for a fruitful conversation for the students to be having, not just for a grade at the end of the year for your GPA. Have you seen any experiences of improvements or ways that have been kind of improved upon, or how student organizations have effectively done that to kind of engage the students in the community?
Yes, absolutely. I saw several examples when I was president of Mount Holyoke. So community-based learning is a start, but often the students will start organizations that are outside of the curriculum. Hope for Haiti organizations, work that takes place through spring break initiatives, but they look at the underlying issues, what's motivating them, and address those through community conversations. I saw it most frequently with the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement and a whole range of issues of identity that come up on college campuses. Student groups have such an important role to play in leadership and in the success of colleges and universities. So shared governance involves student voices. And so the fact that you're willing to do this to create a ripple effect through taking the opportunities that you have and serving as a model for those who wouldn't ever think of going to college is really important. So when I was at Mount Holyoke, I taught every semester, and one of the courses I taught was philosophy for children. So our students in the class would spend the first half of the semester learning bits and pieces about philosophy through children's books. We read The Giving Tree and Frog and Toad and The Important Book, and so a whole range of children's books. And then our students would go in and they would teach philosophy to children, to second graders. And this was in the Martin Luther King Jr. School, and it was in Springfield. Springfield had, at the time, a 13% high school graduation rate, 13%. Very marginalized community, 100% students of color. And the first day that we went into the school, we'd been doing the program for a few years, a fourth grader said to the second graders that we were about to teach, "Oh, those are the philosophers, they're going to change your lives, you wait and see." At the end of the semester, we would have the students from the second grade come to Mount Holyoke, and we had a little graduation ceremony, and we gave them a button with Frog and Toad on it that said, "I'm a philosopher." We brought them to the biology lab, and they got to play with sea urchins. And we brought them to the chapel, and they got to hear how an organ makes sound. And a music professor talked to them about music making. And then we brought them to the art museum, and we had them critique 2 pieces of art. And so that kind of access through student work, it was part of a course, but many of those students went back into the community and contributed to play a visible role in the lives of students and parents who would not have thought about going to college. So thanks for that question. It's a great question. Okay.
Do you want to? You can go. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the talk. So I was just hoping you could help me clarify something in your talk. On one hand, it seemed like you're not for the consumerism in education. We should be doing education for other reasons besides like preparing us to make money or something like that. Mm-hmm. If we were doing that, we wouldn't be fulfilling the purpose of education. But on the other hand, it kind of seems like you think the value of critical thinking and stuff like that is to prepare us for like certain careers that don't exist yet, or to make us flexible and ready in the workforce. And so that kind of seems contradictory to me, and I was hoping you could help me understand why that's not a true contradiction.
My concern about consumerism in higher education is that we need to take into account the public value of education, that it is a public good, not a private commodity. So it goes beyond just getting a job, and it extends to the foundations of American democracy, so educating for citizenship, allowing people to flourish fully as human beings, to grapple with those most fundamental questions of human existence. I know that faculty and others rightly rail against the corporatization of higher education if it means that the curriculum is going to be wrested away from us. But we do have an obligation to help people thrive, and part of thriving is getting a job. I don't know anybody who can't afford not to have a job, and so I don't think it's inconsistent, but having a job is not enough. We talk at ACNU about education being more than a major. It is an experience that will help you. This critical thinking, the moral imagination, all of those pieces will help you in the future. So I don't think they're inconsistent. Having a job and living a life of meaning shouldn't at all be consistent. But thanks, great question.
Yeah, right over here. Hi, yeah, I'll stand up, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the hand there.
Yeah, my name's Jacob. Thank you so much for the talk. It's great opportunity to reflect on like what I'm doing here, you know. So, yeah, I think so. I had just some thoughts about, and then a question about exactly how liberal arts colleges implement this vision for a student body that is gifted in critical thinking and has the tools to conceptually analyze everything happening around them. It seems like the way we do this is through GEs. That's how we are trying to, I guess, endow students with these skills that, you know, and this broad base of knowledge that falls outside of their specialization. It's not clear to me that GEs actually do that at all. Like, I think for the most part, my experience with the GEs has been either I'm not inspired by what I'm learning, or maybe the professor also isn't very inspired by what they're teaching, and it's in order to meet some sort of requirement, in order to meet some sort of ideal, you know, that you have this polymath student who understands, you know, all these fields. But in certain fields, when you only learn at some basic level, you're not actually learning anything at all of substance. I think what you are learning, I think this is kind of where it seeps in, is what I have learned in GEs, there's skills that would be very applicable to working like a desk job, meeting a deadline, you know, completing an assignment according to specifications. And that's what I really learn in my GEs. I don't actually learn a wealth of historical knowledge or a wealth of sociological knowledge. And that's what I would find interesting, and maybe that might be maybe moving away from, we need some sort of alternative maybe to like the GE system. I don't know what that would look like, but it looks like you're kind of hopeless to really instill these values in people with the current system we have now. I mean, people come out of these classes feeling like they got the grade, but, you know, I mean, maybe they wasted their time otherwise, because if they had gotten what we intended for them to get out of it, it would have been incredibly valuable. But what we're intending for them to get out of it when we design the system doesn't actually happen. So I'm wondering what your thoughts might be on how to, actually make that work.
Well, we have a lot of thoughts about this. This is what we
Yeah.
focus on at ACNU. We believe in the use of high-impact practices and integrative learning, so that it gets back to the question that was asked earlier about how you benefit from a general education, and that is, I think, by making those connections across disciplines. That's more important than ever before, so learning can't take place in isolation. When I was at the University of Rhode Island, and was the VP for research, I led a project team. We did it for 5 years. We went to Kenya, and we were working in a community trying to deliver clean water solutions, sustainable agriculture, and entrepreneurship for women in the West Lake District near Lake Victoria. This was a Luo community. 80% of the families were polygamous, 69% poverty index. People were dying from HIV and AIDS, not from the virus, but from AIDS-related illnesses as a result of lack of access to clean water. They still practiced widow inheritance. They still do. And so when a woman's husband dies, she's inherited by a male relative and has unprotected sex to cleanse her of her dead husband's evil spirits. So there was a proliferation of HIV. They didn't believe that HIV was caused from a virus. They thought that the symptoms of AIDS were chira, a thinning disease that resulted from violating cultural norms and taboos. So we had these engineering students who were coming up with clay pot water filtration using moringa seeds as natural flocculants, sand water filtration. But if the residents don't believe that there's a problem, they're not going to use these solutions. We also were trying to communicate messages to a population that read neither English nor Swahili. And so we decided to communicate our messages on conga cloths, and so we needed art and design students. We needed students in psychology and the humanities to address the psychosocial issues necessary to implement the solutions. USAID had gone in, they built a well, but once the well part broke, it was useless. And so we needed to find sustainable solutions. We needed to work with community members to gain their trust. So the point you're making is so crucial for higher education today. I think we need to restructure higher education in a way that rewards people for the kind of high-impact practices, integrative learning, that you are advocating for in the curriculum. Instead, we reward people based on, what I refer to as these peer-reviewed journal articles in arcane journals that 6 people will read, instead of the transformative power of education that takes place in the classroom every single day. We need to provide opportunities for faculty to engage in the kind of professional development that will create expertise, but also reward them for that hard work. So I agree with you. You could come work with us at ASU.
Thank you.
Dr. Pasquerella, thank you so much for being here. I'm a graduate student here, a very old one. I have 2 college students myself, and just trying to help them navigate between what they like to do in school and what's really practical. Is there a way that maybe college campuses and universities can reconfigure the curriculum where they can help navigate through what they like, and also fields that are really relevant now, the science, the technology, mathematics, and something that they can, as an 18-year-old kid that comes in, that can be guided towards something a little more practical too, in addition to the liberal arts education?
Well, I mean, we think that there's a false dichotomy between pragmatic education and liberal education. We do talk about the pragmatic liberal arts, but you're exactly right. When I was president of Mount Holyoke, I established a program called the LINK program, designed to connect curriculum to career, and provided paid internships for each of our students during her time at Mount Holyoke. And that's recognizing that not everybody can afford to take advantage of internship opportunities because they have to work. And so we need to do a better job at the experiential learning component to provide the practical skills that will help people make those connections between curriculum and career, provide them with a reflective space so that we are making sure that what you're learning in the class is connected to your internship experience and connected to your the world of work. So finding the resources to do that, I mean, we raised $54 million. It's expensive to implement these programs, but if we don't provide students with the experiences, then they will be at a disadvantage, and it will increase that growing economic segregation in higher education. Because you will hear from Jeff Salingo the push for liberal education and the need to connect curriculum to career. Every CEO that I know, and we do surveys with them all the time, we just hosted a group of them, says that a liberal education is the best preparation. I would only hire liberally educated individuals, but they're not the ones doing the hiring. The CEOs aren't doing the hiring. It's the HR professionals. So how are we going to make arguments that resonate with them? And that's through this combination of liberal, vocational, experiential education.